You know Elon Musk. You know Jeff Bezos. But the second richest man on the face of the planet? Odds are you couldn't pick him out of a lineup. And that's exactly how Larry Ellison likes it. He's the ghost king of tech, running an empire that fuels the world's digital bloodstream, while living a life so outrageously opulent it makes movie villains look modest. Born August 17, 1944, in the Bronx to an unwed teenage mother, Florence Spellman, Larry's first 9 months were a fight for survival. Pneumonia nearly killed him. His father, an Italian-American pilot, was nowhere to be found. His mother, overwhelmed, gave him away to her aunt and uncle in Chicago. That's the origin story of the man who'd go on to own entire islands. Fast forward a couple decades, he's a restless student at the University of Illinois until his adoptive mom dies. He drops out, he tries again at the University of Chicago, and drops out again. No degree, no prestige. Just a sharp mind and a chip on his shoulder big enough to block out the sun. And that chip, it would become his greatest weapon. In 1977, Larry and two buddies, Bob Miner and Ed Oates, take an idea ripped from an IBM research paper and build a company called Software Development Laboratories. A clunky name for a dangerous dream, to turn raw data into power. 6 years later, they rebrand as Oracle, and Larry Ellison is sharpening his claws for the corporate jungle. What starts as a small software firm mutates into a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. Oracle doesn't just make databases, it makes the databases that run banks, governments, militaries, Fortune 500 titans. It's digital oxygen. And Larry? He's the guy selling the air. As of August 2025, the man you've probably never seen on a billboard is worth about $295 billion. That's not rich. That's bending the global economy rich. This year alone, he made over $60 billion, riding the Oracle AI and cloud explosion like a billionaire surfer on a tidal wave of money. And while the world was drooling over Musk's rockets or Bezos' yachts, Larry was quietly buying a Hawaiian island, Lanai, just to turn it into his personal utopia. 98% ownership, private resorts, exotic species conservation, a billionaire's playground disguised as eco-philanthropy. He doesn't just own toys, he collects them like weapons in an arms race of extravagance. Mansions in Malibu, estates in San Francisco, hideaways in Lake Tahoe, a compound in Japan, a yacht so massive, 138 meters, he had it extended just to outsize Paul Allen's. Fighter jets, vintage cars, priceless art. If there's a billionaire bucket list, Larry didn't just check it, he bought the damn bucket factory. But here's the thing, this isn't some quiet gentleman billionaire. Larry Ellison plays to win, and winning often means drawing blood. Hostile takeovers? He's done them, bragged about them. Rival CEOs? He's joked about shooting them. He's sent private detectives after Microsoft. He's pushed Oracle to the edge of collapse in the 90s, chasing big deals, and then pulled it back from the brink with the kind of iron will most people only use to lift a beer. And the scandals? They're not footnotes. They're chapters. Political ties that raise eyebrows. Accusations in international conflicts. 4 marriages and a reputation as a tech playboy. To his critics, he's ruthless, arrogant, untouchable. To his fans, he's a visionary who makes the rules because he's smart enough to break them. Larry Ellison is the man who can have dinner with Netanyahu, close a $100 billion deal with OpenAI, and still walk through an airport without being mobbed, because the world doesn't even realize the scale of his throne. But here's the kicker. The climb to $295 billion wasn't just about genius or grit. It was about a single moment, a single decision, that could have made him a nobody instead of a king. And when that moment came, Larry didn't blink. What he did next would rewrite Silicon Valley's rules forever. Picture this. It's the late 70s. Silicon Valley is still a dusty gold rush town for nerds with soldering irons, and Larry Ellison isn't yet the predator he'll become. He's running a tiny company with 2 partners, barely enough money to keep the lights on, when he stumbles on an obscure IBM research paper about something called a relational database. 99% of the world's engineers skim it and move on. Larry? He smells blood in the water. This is where most founders would ask, can we build this? Larry asked, how fast can we build it, and who do we have to crush to own it? That was the DNA shift, the pivot from being another hopeful to becoming the hunter. He took IBM's idea, beat them to market and planted Oracle's flag before Big Blue could even lace its boots. By the early 80s, Oracle is no longer some side project. It's the engine room of the information age. Banks, governments, and defense contractors start plugging into Oracle systems like life support. Data becomes currency, and Larry Ellison becomes the mint. But here's the thing about Larry. He doesn't see competitors as rivals. He sees them as prey. When Oracle needed market share, he didn't go knocking politely. He went for the jugular. The PeopleSoft deal in 2003? That was a $10 billion hostile takeover where Larry joked about shooting the CEO. Siebel Systems? Swallowed for $5.8 billion. BEA Systems? Another $8.5 billion. If there was a gap in Oracle's dominance, Larry filled it with someone else's bones. This scorched earth style wasn't without collateral damage. By the early 90s, Oracle was drowning in accounting scandals. Revenue projections were inflated, Wall Street was circling, and analysts were whispering about a total collapse. For most CEOs, this is where the curtain drops. But Larry? He's the guy who thrives when the house is burning. He cut costs, retooled products, and doubled down on his aggressive sales culture. Within a few years, Oracle was back on top, bigger and badder. And while Oracle's power grew, so did Larry's appetite for the kind of life that makes headlines. In 2012, he drops $300 million on Lanai, a Hawaiian island, just because he can. Not a beachfront property, not a penthouse, an entire island. He turns it into a hybrid between a billionaire resort and a conservation paradise, 5-star hotels next to rare plant sanctuaries. The kind of move that lets him play both James Bond villain and National Geographic hero in the same news cycle. The man also sails, literally, into the history books, bankrolling America's Cup victories. Not renting boats, not sponsoring teams, owning the damn show. And yet, behind all this swagger, there's a laser-focused tactician who's still thinking about the next kill. That kill in 2025? The $100 billion OpenAI Stargate deal. Microsoft thought they had AI locked up. Larry waltzed in, outbid them, and sealed the deal at the White House with Sam Altman and Masayoshi Son in the room. That wasn't just a business move. It was a power play broadcast on the world stage. And while Oracle's AI cloud revenue exploded, netting Larry over $60 billion this year alone, he was busy making political waves. Donating more than $16 million to the Friends of the Israel Defense Forces, vacationing with Netanyahu, and allegedly offering him a board seat. Allies call it loyalty. Critics call it complicity in geopolitical firestorms. Either way, Larry doesn't flinch. This is the contradiction that makes him so dangerous. Philanthropist one day, corporate assassin the next. He signed the Giving Pledge, promising 95% of his fortune to charity, while also being sued in 2024 for allegedly aiding ethnic cleansing. His hands are clean and dirty at the same time, depending on who you ask. But here's the question no one's asking yet. In a world where Musk is chasing Mars and Bezos is building space stations, what is Larry Ellison quietly building right here on Earth? The answer is something so audacious, so big, it could outlive every tech empire we know. Larry Ellison doesn't care about rockets, moon colonies, or NFT space monkeys. His war isn't fought in orbit, it's fought in the invisible infrastructure of Earth. The power grid of the modern age isn't electricity, it's data, and Larry owns the plumbing. Oracle isn't just software, it's the bloodstream of the world's institutions. You check your bank balance, Oracle. You book a flight, Oracle. You file your taxes, somewhere in the background, Oracle. It's the unseen empire that makes governments function and corporations hum. And because nobody understands it, nobody realizes how much leverage it gives the man holding the keys. That's Larry's genius, visibility for the products, invisibility for himself. Musk thrives on being a meme. Bezos thrives on being a brand. Larry thrives on being underestimated. That's why he can sit in a White House meeting with Sam Altman and Masayoshi Son, announce a $100 billion Stargate AI supercomputer deal, and still walk outside without a single tourist asking for a selfie. But invisibility isn't weakness. It's camouflage. Behind it, Larry has been quietly building the ultimate AI arsenal. Oracle's cloud revenue now makes up 77% of the company's sales, driven by NVIDIA-powered AI infrastructure that's already reshaping industries. And when AI takes over the world's workflows, and it will, guess whose servers it'll be running on? Of course, empires like this don't get built without blood on the floor. Larry's been accused of weaponizing corporate law the same way warlords use tanks, hostile takeovers, legal sieges, private investigations against rivals. In 2000, he famously hired detectives to dig up dirt on Microsoft, paying them to rummage through competitors' trash, literally. That's not a metaphor. That's the man's actual business strategy. If the prize is big enough, no tactic is off the table. And yet he has the audacity to wrap this ruthlessness in philanthropy. In 2010, he signed the Giving Pledge, promising to donate 95% of his wealth before he dies. Through the Ellison Foundation, he's funneled over $500 million into anti-aging research, cancer treatments, and environmental conservation, especially on Lanai, where he plays the role of benevolent island god, protecting endangered species and promoting renewable energy. In 2016, he dropped $200 million on USC's Cancer Research Center. On paper, it's saintly. But saints don't build fleets of fighter planes. Saints don't own the Rising Sun, one of the largest yachts in the world, just to make sure Paul Allen's looked smaller. Saints don't spend decades cultivating the image of a hard-drinking playboy billionaire who sails into competitions with a team designed to humiliate opponents. And saints certainly don't hand their son, David Ellison, the financial firepower to buy Paramount and CBS in 2025, then shift the network toward unbiased news that just so happens to align with Donald Trump's political agenda. If you think Larry's influence stops at tech, you're missing the plot. He's building an empire that controls information at every level, how it's stored, how it's transmitted, and how it's told. The scary part, he's doing it while the public's attention is fixated on other billionaires. Larry Ellison has been able to move pieces on the global chessboard without anyone noticing the board exists. And somewhere in that strategy lies his most controversial move yet, one that didn't just threaten his rival's market share, but came dangerously close to sparking a political scandal that could have ended him. In 2024, Larry Ellison's carefully controlled, low-profile dominance took a direct hit. A lawsuit dropped like a bomb, accusing him of aiding ethnic cleansing in Palestine through his close financial and personal ties to Israel. This wasn't some vague, nameless donation. It was a paper trail. Larry had given more than $16 million to the Friends of the Israel Defense Forces, making him their largest private donor. He wasn't just writing checks either. He was vacationing with Benjamin Netanyahu, spotted together in private jets and luxury resorts, and, according to the suit, even offering Netanyahu a seat on a corporate board. In the age of social media outrage, this was dynamite. Critics painted him as a billionaire bankrolling oppression. His defenders said it was loyalty to an ally and a friend. But in the court of public opinion, nuance dies quick, and the headlines were brutal. And Larry? He didn't flinch. No public groveling, no PR-filtered apology tour. He's old-school corporate warfare. When under attack, he either countersues, outspends, or just waits until the noise dies. While pundits screamed Oracle stock kept climbing, AI cloud deals kept rolling in, and Larry quietly doubled down on his projects. Because this wasn't the first time he'd walked through fire. In the early 90s, Oracle's cooked accounting numbers nearly tanked the company. The SEC was circling, lawsuits were flying, and investors were whispering the word collapse. Larry's response? Slash and burn the dead weight, ramp up aggressive sales, and lock down government contracts. It wasn't pretty, but it saved Oracle and proved something. The man thrives in chaos. That's why the 2024 scandal didn't shake him. If anything, it revealed the scale of his insulation. While other billionaires obsess over their image, Larry builds moats of cash, political allies, and contractual chokeholds on industries. You can't cancel someone whose servers your entire economy runs on. Still, the controversy painted a stark picture. Larry Ellison doesn't separate business from politics. His corporate empire is an extension of his personal alliances, and his personal alliances have geopolitical consequences. When you own the data pipelines for governments and also vacation with their leaders, the line between commerce and statecraft blurs fast. And here's where it gets even darker. While critics were busy dissecting his Israel ties, Larry's son David was pulling off one of the boldest media coups in modern history. Backed by his father's wealth and influence, David bought Paramount and CBS in 2025, promising varied perspectives in news coverage, a vague phrase that conveniently aligned with a pro-Trump editorial shift. Behind the curtain, it looked less like media reform and more like a generational power grab, merging tech's control of data with media's control of narrative. Larry Ellison had already conquered the invisible empire of data. Now his family was moving to own the empire of perception. And if you think that was an accident, you don't understand how this man plays the game. Every acquisition, every alliance, every yacht race and political photo op, it's a piece in a decades-long strategy to make the Ellison name unshakable. But all of this, his power, his influence, his untouchable status, still rests on one thing: Oracle's iron grip on global infrastructure. And in 2025, that grip was about to face its most dangerous test yet. By mid-2025, Larry Ellison was riding higher than ever, $60 billion richer in just months. Oracle's AI cloud revenue spiking like a heart monitor on adrenaline. The $100 billion Stargate supercomputer deal had cemented Oracle as a critical artery in the AI gold rush. Governments, Fortune 500s and startups alike were rushing to rent Oracle's firepower. But when the money floods in, so do the sharks. The competition smelled blood. Amazon Web Services wanted his enterprise clients. Microsoft, still sore from losing the OpenAI bid, began an aggressive charm offensive on Oracle's biggest accounts. And Google? They were dangling AI-powered cloud discounts so deep they bordered on kamikaze pricing. The message was clear: take Ellison down, or at least make him bleed. Inside Oracle's glass towers, the shift was brutal. Cloud engineers who'd built careers on traditional contracts found themselves staring at pink slips. Larry wasn't sentimental. He slashed jobs and restructured teams overnight, pivoting resources to AI infrastructure and supercomputing. Critics called it heartless. Larry called it necessary. He knew exactly what was at stake. If Oracle didn't dominate AI cloud, the rest of the empire could wither. And here's the thing: Ellison doesn't just fight market wars, he fights psychological wars. In private meetings, he reminded clients of one unshakable truth: Amazon can fail, Google can pivot, but Oracle has been running the systems of civilization for decades. Banks, militaries, hospitals, they're locked in, and migration would be digital open-heart surgery. That's not just retention, that's dependency. Meanwhile, his political alliances were paying dividends. Having publicly tied himself to Donald Trump's orbit during the Stargate announcement at the White House, Larry positioned Oracle as the de facto AI infrastructure partner of the US government. That meant contracts so sticky, rivals would need a chainsaw to pry them loose. But in the shadows, another problem was brewing. A problem even Larry's billions couldn't instantly solve. Privacy watchdogs and antitrust regulators were circling. Oracle's data holdings weren't just vast, they were intimate. Financial records, health information, government intelligence. The same invisible empire that gave Larry control also made him a target for those arguing no single corporation should hold that much of the world's private life in its servers. And then came the leaks. Anonymous insiders claimed Oracle was pushing boundaries with government surveillance contracts, using AI to process data at unprecedented speed. Was it legal? Mostly. Was it ethical? That was murkier. Whispers turned into headlines, and headlines into calls for congressional hearings. Larry's name was back in the crosshairs. He could have fought it in the press. Instead, he leaned into the smoke. "We run the infrastructure that keeps you alive," he reportedly told one critic at a closed-door event. "If you think you can replace us, try it." It wasn't just defiance, it was a dare. But behind that bravado, there was a genuine risk. One government investigation with the wrong findings, one high-profile breach, and the trust that kept Oracle indispensable could fracture. And for a man who's built his fortune on being the system nobody can unplug, that's the kind of fracture that can become a death blow. Larry Ellison had faced hostile takeovers, financial scandals, and political firestorms. But this was different. This was the possibility of the game board itself being flipped over. And then, just when it looked like the walls were closing in, Larry made a move so unexpected, so aggressive, it didn't just protect his empire. It expanded it into territory no one thought he could touch. It hit the industry like a sucker punch. In late 2025, when everyone assumed Larry Ellison would be hunkering down to weather the regulatory storm, he did the opposite. He went on the offensive. Not just a press release or a flashy keynote. No, Larry pulled the kind of stunt that rewrites the chessboard in one move. He announced Oracle's acquisition of 3 massive data infrastructure companies in a single week, inking the deals so fast that Wall Street analysts barely had time to refresh their spreadsheets. These weren't cute little startups with hipster logos. These were backbone providers in telecommunications, cybersecurity, and advanced AI chips. Overnight, Oracle wasn't just a software titan. It was now sitting directly inside the pipelines of the internet itself. Rivals gasped. Regulators screamed. Larry smirked. It wasn't just expansion, it was insurance. By owning pieces of the internet's nervous system, Oracle became harder to regulate without risking the stability of entire national systems. You can slap fines on a company. You can't pull the plug on infrastructure without blowing up your own economy. Larry had just made himself not only too big to fail, but too embedded to attack. The move also sent a different kind of message to his enemies in the cloud wars. I can still move faster and hit harder than any of you. Amazon's cloud division scrambled to counter. Microsoft tried to spin the acquisitions as short-term distractions. Google just stayed quiet. Because deep down, they knew this wasn't a sprint Larry was running. It was trench warfare, and he'd just fortified his position with steel and concrete. And in a twist only Larry could pull off, he framed the acquisitions as a philanthropic step toward securing the global digital commons. He stood on stage at an Oracle conference, wearing his trademark open-collar shirt, and said with a straight face, "We have a responsibility to ensure the safety and continuity of the world's digital systems." The press ate it up. His critics saw it for what it was, a brilliant PR shield over a ruthless power grab. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. While tech media debated the ethics of the buyouts, the investigations into Oracle's data practices lost front-page traction. Public outrage shifted to more obvious villains. And Larry? He was quietly locking in multi-decade government contracts tied directly to the infrastructure he'd just bought. But here's the part the public never saw. Those acquisitions weren't just about business. They were about something personal, something that had been simmering in Larry's life for decades, the kind of motivation that doesn't show up in SEC filings or corporate bios. It went back to a moment when Larry Ellison wasn't yet the $295 billion ghost king of tech, back to a time when he was just another kid with no degree, no safety net, and no control over his own future. A moment that planted a seed in his mind. Never again would he let someone else hold the power over his destiny. And in 2025, that seed had finally grown into something massive, thorn-covered and untouchable. But what Larry didn't know, what nobody knew, was that his biggest challenge yet wasn't going to come from his rivals. It was going to come from inside his own empire. For decades, Larry Ellison had played the game with one unshakable rule: control the pieces and you control the board. But in late 2025, the threat didn't come from Amazon, Microsoft, or regulators. It came from inside Oracle itself. It started as whispers, quiet resignations, odd leaks to the press, rumors of internal sabotage. At first, Larry didn't flinch. In his world, backstabbing was as common as coffee breaks. But then the leaks got personal. Sensitive client contracts, confidential AI infrastructure designs, even internal memos detailing Oracle's most politically sensitive government deals, landing in the hands of journalists who knew exactly where to hit. The trail pointed to an elite group deep in Oracle's AI division, engineers Larry himself had handpicked after the Stargate deal. These weren't disgruntled mid-level staffers. They were the kind of people who could make or break billion-dollar systems with a few keystrokes. And some of them had started talking about ethics, about how Oracle's AI was being used in ways that compromised human rights, about how the same surveillance systems sold to governments overseas were being quietly expanded for domestic use. The allegations were dynamite. If proven, they wouldn't just draw more regulators. They could fracture Oracle's government contracts, tank the stock, and torch Larry's legacy. But here's where you see the cold steel in Larry's DNA. Instead of purging the rebels outright, he invited them in, face-to-face meetings. "Tell me exactly what you think," he said. He let them talk, nodding, asking questions. Then, just like in his corporate raids, he mapped every angle of their positions, who they were connected to, what leverage they had, what they wanted. Within weeks, the most vocal critics were either quietly bought out, reassigned to projects that kept them away from sensitive contracts, or, mysteriously, gone from the company entirely. No public firing, no headlines, just erased. But the damage wasn't entirely contained. One former engineer slipped through the cracks, taking a trove of internal documents with them. And when those documents started surfacing in encrypted journalist Dropboxes, they painted a portrait of Larry Ellison as something far more dangerous than just a billionaire businessman. According to the leaks, Oracle's AI had been quietly integrated into a network of surveillance contracts so vast it spanned continents. From border security to predictive policing, from foreign intelligence gathering to domestic monitoring, Oracle's systems were not just storing the world's data, they were shaping how power was enforced. The question was no longer whether Larry Ellison was just the second richest man in the world. It was whether he'd quietly become one of the most powerful unelected figures on Earth. And if the public ever fully connected those dots, even $295 billion might not be enough to shield him. But before that could happen, Larry made a countermove so calculated, so theatrically audacious, that it turned the narrative on its head, and even his enemies had to admit it was genius. Larry Ellison didn't just survive scandals, he weaponized them. The leaked documents were starting to catch fire online, framing him as the shadow architect of a global surveillance web. For most billionaires, this would be a PR death spiral. Larry saw it as stage lighting. His counterstrike was pure misdirection mixed with high drama. Within weeks of the first leak, he unveiled what he called the Ellison Global Safety Initiative, a $2 billion philanthropic program aimed at protecting endangered communities from cyber attacks, fraud, and digital exploitation. The press release dripped with humanitarian language, but buried in the fine print, the initiative's backbone would be Oracle's AI surveillance infrastructure, the very system critics accused him of abusing. In one move, he reframed the narrative. This wasn't about a billionaire spying on the world, it was about a visionary safeguarding it. And the kicker? Governments lined up to endorse it. Why? Because Larry promised participating countries discounted access to Oracle's cutting-edge AI threat detection, a Trojan horse that deepened his tech's integration into their national security. On stage at the launch, Larry wasn't contrite. He wasn't defensive. He was electric. Wearing his signature open-collar shirt and speaking in that flat, deliberate cadence that turns into a hammer when he wants it to, he said, "We live in an age where data decides whether people live or die. If you think protecting that data is optional, you're already too late." The applause was thunderous. Critics groaned, and somewhere in between the average viewer nodded along, half convinced that maybe, just maybe, Ellison's empire wasn't such a bad thing after all. And while the press was busy covering his philanthropy, Larry was tightening his grip internally. The rogue engineer who had escaped with the leaks, suddenly facing multiple lawsuits for breach of contract and violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The legal onslaught was so intense that most journalists who'd been circling the story backed off, unwilling to risk their own necks. But Larry wasn't just playing defense. He was already eyeing his next conquest. Something far outside traditional software. Something that would fuse his empire's two great pillars, data and influence, into a single, unstoppable force. And if it worked, it wouldn't just make him richer. It could give him the kind of sway over public opinion that presidents dream about and dictators kill for. And the first move in that plan? A phone call to his son David, the new media mogul holding Paramount and CBS in his hands. Because Larry Ellison wasn't content with running the world's data. He was ready to script its story. The call between Larry Ellison and his son David wasn't just a father-son chat. It was the opening scene of a new kind of power grab. David had only recently closed the Paramount and CBS takeover, promising varied perspectives in news coverage. To the public, that sounded harmless, even noble. But behind the curtain, Larry saw a gold-plated opportunity to merge Oracle's control of information systems with David's control of information narratives. It was the same playbook Larry had perfected in business. Own the rails, then decide what runs on them. With Oracle, those rails were the databases and servers that kept the world's infrastructure humming. With Paramount and CBS, those rails would now include the stories, headlines, and cultural touchstones that shaped how people thought about everything from AI to geopolitics. The first step was subtle. CBS began running more coverage on the importance of secure data infrastructure and America's need to lead in AI. Paramount greenlit documentaries highlighting the heroic potential of technology to solve global crises, many of which just happened to feature Oracle partnerships. It wasn't propaganda in the blunt, old-school sense. It was narrative shaping, the way a river shapes a canyon, slow, persistent, and almost invisible unless you know what to look for. Larry wasn't about to let this become some clumsy vanity project. He funded research departments inside the media empire, feeding them exclusive access to Oracle's AI-driven data analysis. These teams could spot cultural shifts before they went mainstream, giving CBS and Paramount the edge on producing content that landed like a punch to the gut at exactly the right moment. And then came the bombshell announcement, a new CBS primetime series, half documentary, half drama, about the global AI revolution, with unprecedented access to Oracle's most secretive projects. The trailer was a glossy mix of space-age visuals, emotional interviews, and heroic music. It framed Ellison's AI network not as a cold corporate machine, but as the unsung guardian of modern civilization. Critics saw it for what it was, a billion-dollar PR campaign disguised as entertainment. But for millions of viewers, it worked. All the while, Larry played the long game. He didn't care if every episode won awards. He cared that Oracle became synonymous with safety, stability, and inevitability in the public's mind. You don't regulate what you think you need to survive. And as this quiet fusion of tech empire and media empire took shape, Larry's influence crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just the second richest man on Earth. He was becoming the invisible editor-in-chief of reality. But there was one thing even he couldn't control: the storm brewing from outside the United States. A storm that threatened not just his business model, but the entire global network he had spent nearly 50 years building. And when it hit, it wouldn't be an enemy he could outspend, outbuy, or outlawyer. It came from abroad, fast and coordinated, a coalition of foreign governments, tech watchdog groups, and breakaway AI developers who saw Oracle not as infrastructure, but as a global choke point. And they had a weapon Larry Ellison couldn't simply buy off: a rival open-source AI network designed to bypass Oracle's servers entirely. On paper, it was just software. In reality, it was a declaration of independence. Nations that had long been quietly uneasy about Oracle's dominance saw their chance. If they could migrate off Ellison's backbone, they could claw back control over their own data, free from the reach of American corporate and political influence. It wasn't just a tech revolt, it was geopolitical. Russia, parts of the EU, and several Asian economies signed on almost overnight. Their pitch to the world was simple: no more single point of failure, no more Ellison. The messaging was sharp, viral, and devastating. Larry's first instinct was to fight like he always did, deploy lawyers, lobbyists, and acquisition offers big enough to make defectors choke. But this wasn't a boardroom battle. This was an ideological war. An ideology he knew was harder to kill than a company. Still, he didn't get to $295 billion by folding. In an uncharacteristic move, Larry went public with a rare, aggressive interview, calling the coalition a circus of amateurs playing with matches in a dynamite factory. He warned that their open-source AI would be riddled with security holes, vulnerable to cybercriminals, terrorists, and rogue states. Some laughed it off as fear-mongering. Others listened. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, he initiated the most radical restructuring Oracle had seen since its founding. Entire divisions were reassigned to create hybrid systems that could integrate or infect the new network. The strategy wasn't just to beat the open-source rival, but to make it dependent on Oracle's core tech without its creators realizing it. If successful, it would be the ultimate Ellison move: turn an enemy into an unwitting client. The stakes were beyond money now. This was about whether the second richest man in the world could hold on to the invisible throne he'd built, whether the ghost king of tech could survive when the walls around his empire started crumbling from the outside in. The coalition pushed harder. Oracle fought back harder still. And somewhere in the tension between those two forces, the future of the digital world was being written. Quietly, invisibly, in boardrooms and server rooms, far from the noise of public debate. Larry Ellison knew one thing. If he won this, his name would never again be the answer to the richest man you've never heard of. If he lost, well, in Larry's mind, losing simply wasn't an option.